Good afternoon. I'm Brian Dunbar. I'm with the Institute for the Built Environment at Colorado State University. And our institute for 20 years has been working on real projects, but we've also been searching for what's coming next. Where are we going from here? And maybe there's ways to make the built and natural environments blend in beneficial ways. So you've been sending some texts in today, and we want to take a look at what your results are. So that's how you've been defining regeneration. It's live, so it's moving as you give it some more ideas. But it looks like we're seeing some great words like roll cradle.
Yeah, what's roll cradle?
Who is doing that? But abundance and renewal and certainly vitality and systems and growth and many other words. You know, this concept of regeneration for the built environment is something that's been coming at us for a number of years, and yet it's still being defined, and that's why we wanted you to help us define it. So during the day today, we're going to take you into some exercises and give you some ideas as we present some concepts that push beyond current sustainability practices into the realm of regenerative design and living built environments. And we're going to show you a framework that's called lenses that we've created and we want to give to others to help guide your processes for project teams to create living built environments. So today's objectives really are for us to help you define regeneration, to help you begin to discover ways to find the core or the essence of a project. And then we want to take you through exercises, and we're even going to throw a skit at you to try to help you see what we're talking about the importance of process working toward regenerative design. So I've introduced myself. I want to let my friends introduce themselves, and they're not just going to tell you their name, they're also going to tell you what brought them here to these topics. So Stacy.
I'm Stacy. I come from a private practice in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I've been working in private practice for over 20 years and sustainability, mostly lead projects, for over 10 years. And I just feel like we're also looking for a way to move beyond maybe to a larger context rather than the project parameters. And I'm very interested in this, and I think this has a lot of potential to do that.
My name is Josie Plout. I am the executive director of a new nonprofit organization called CLEAR, which is the Center for Living Environments and Regeneration. And I also have the distinct pleasure of working with Brian at the Institute for the Built Environment at CSU. And as Brian will tell you, I'm never satisfied. I always think that there's something more that we can do, some further horizon that we can reach toward, that less bad is never good enough, and that we need to be focusing on how to create whole, vibrant living systems, and that takes a change of mind. And so I'm very passionate about this work and excited to be here with you today.
Hi folks, I'm Max, and the first thing you should know about me, particularly those in the front row, is that this is a birthmark, not a hickey. This guy came to Greenbuild with a hickey. What's going on there? And there's some familiar faces out there that have probably heard that joke 6 or 7 times. It's nice being born with an opening joke. But I founded my own consulting firm called Praxis Building Solutions, focused on sustainability consulting, as well as a nonprofit called Sustainability Nexus, and doing all kinds of different things through those two kind of instruments. But the other thing you should know about me that will explain why I say so many weird things today is I was raised by 2 psychologists. So that explains why I'm kind of messed up as well. But I think the thing that I'm attracted to most in these processes that we're exploring today are the instances where I can see the same patterns cropping up in very different kinds and scales of living systems, from psychology to ecology to OD to biology. That's what kind of lights me up the most, is when I see those, and I think there's opportunities to transition lessons we've learned across those disciplines.
So I'll start off and try to give you a little bit of an introduction about what we're going to talk about today. Let's start with the basic premise that humans, all of us, are an integral part of the environment, that we can be contributive and value-adding to our surroundings. We're not fundamentally bad, but we do need to pay attention and move beyond our normal business as usual. We can play an important role in enhancing and regenerating natural and social systems, but it is a mindset shift. Well, what does this mean exactly? So if you take Darwinism, survival of the fittest, and all of that, we're used to hearing that it's something about being the toughest and the strongest within a system, and those are the survivors. But if we think about it differently, what if it's the best fit within a system and working together in the best way? So you could say fit equals being of service as another way to look at it. Regeneration is about change and benefit creation. And it will take thinking laterally about everything we do and how we engage our environments. The kind of shift we are intending can be scary. And there's a lot of things to fear in this world, one of them being in DC right now, potentially. But in terms of regenerative development, it's time for us to move beyond fear. And so how do we do that? We need to open our eyes to the opportunities that we see around us in our everyday work, in our lives, and particularly in the projects that we're involved in. We play a really important role here. And we can heal and revitalize broken systems if we do pay attention and move beyond that fear. Living environments are the goal. Regenerative development is the process and what we're going to talk about today. Regeneration doesn't just maintain, but it creates prosperity and vitality within living environments. So what is the difference between regeneration and other practices? A regenerative approach focuses on evolution. It's not about maintaining or restoring. Rather, it's about creating and evolving systems into a renewed state of health and vitality. Nature regenerates every day. Humans and animals, all of us, also regenerate. When we have broken bones, they regenerate. When we lose energy, we sleep or we eat, take a break, and that's regeneration. In nature, fire and flood happen, and forests and streams regenerate. So we're a part of these natural processes, but we have also disrupted many of them. So we need to look around, pay attention, and our engagement is imperative in this cycle and supporting truly living natural environments.
That's great. Thanks, Stacy. So I can't sit still and talk. I can't really sit still at all. So I'm going to walk around a little bit while I chat with you. So what you see on screen may look a little bit familiar to those of you that have been digging into this concept of regeneration or regenerative development for a while. There's sort of versions of this out there, and what we've done is evolved it a little bit to reflect what we think is a little bit more sort of accurate in the way to apply these terms. So you can kind of think of this and imagine it as sort of an animatable evaluation framework. So that's kind of what's different between this and what you've probably seen of it before. So it's basically a spectrum. If we're looking at the whole world, if we're looking at our effects on all of Earth, right? So you think of this really just as a spectrum of our worst possible impacts at the leftmost side of the seesaw and our best possible impacts at the rightmost side. And sorry to be Debbie Downer, but the reality is the way humans are running around trying to meet their needs, whether it's for food or shelter or travel, almost all of those are profoundly degenerative effects on our living systems on Earth, right? None of you are surprised by that. You wouldn't be a Greenbuild probably if you were. But so within this framework, what that means is that essentially our effects are starting to tilt this fulcrum, starting to tilt this seesaw, where even though living systems and maybe some human interventions in the world are still a little bit regenerative, the vast majority of our impacts, we're outweighing the regeneration with degeneration. So that's a problem. So one of the other things that you'll find that's different about this than versions of it that you've probably seen is where sustainability shows up. So we believe that sustainability is not a point on this spectrum, it's a condition of the whole system. So if this is tilted, and the cliff is there, can anybody guess what happens if it stays tilted that way for too long, right? Yeah, off the cliff. And so what we believe is that essentially sustainability is greater than or equal to neutral tilt. So if it's flat or it's tilting away from the cliff, that's in theory sustainable, right? So you can also take this same framework and set of ideas and take it down in scale into projects. You can use the fulcrum, as we call it, to set goals, to evaluate performance, and you can even create a version of it that gives you very technical analysis or measurement of technical systems in particular. But so you could even imagine a version of this could sort of be like another version of USGBC's dynamic plaque, where your overall fulcrum is telling you your performance, for those that are familiar with that concept. But so this is what we're trying to do. One of the other kind of, I think, truths that this framework illuminates is that less bad is really, really important. So if you're moving one of these degenerative effects halfway to the fulcrum, you've just cut the downforce that it's putting on the overall fulcrum in half, right? If you're being really literal about the physics of this metaphor. And so that's super important. It means the stuff on the regenerative side has to do that much less work to account for that degeneration. So there's a lot of folks out there talking about how less bad is not good, but it's critical. It's got to happen. It just can't be all that we're doing. So another kind of point here, we're just going to share this with you really, really quickly and kind of reflect on it throughout the session a little bit more, is that what you're measuring here is potentially a bunch of different fulcrums, right? So you could have a separate fulcrum for every impact category on your project, and it's just important to note that they're not necessarily directly offsetting. So if you're producing, if you're maintaining a hydrologic natural condition on a site, but also producing a whole bunch of waste, those things don't necessarily immediately offset. But frameworks like this should be an opportunity used skillfully to uncover that kind of nuance and explore it. So in other words, we've got apples, oranges, bananas, and kiwis, and we need to make sure that we're looking at the interrelationships of those things and not just assume that we can put them all on the same seesaw, right? The other thing just to kind of mention, and I want to jump back to this version to talk about it real quick, is degenerative and regenerative are living system terms, really. So technical systems can't in and of themselves regenerate. They can only hope to enable or not hamper regeneration and degeneration. So just when we talk about, hey, is that pen regenerative? We'll know, right? Because it's not alive. But the way it's produced may or may not do harm and hamper regeneration. So just encouraging clarity about how you apply these living system terms. So let's apply some of these terms and ideas that we've been talking about to an example.
All right, so you're about to see quite an amateur skit here in a moment, and I'm going to set it up for you. So here's the scenario. So we have the city has identified a revitalization district, and it has secured some money to develop some properties to bring that area up in many ways. So we have an assembled group here, and we have a regenerate hero, Max.
No pressure.
We have a devious developer, Josie, and an adamant architect, Stacy. And I think the crusty planner's a little bit late, so I think he'll be here shortly. But this group is going to, we're inviting you in to the first project meeting, where this group has some ideas, or at least our regenerate hero has some ideas about how we might create a living regenerative environment with this abandoned property.
So what if we just throw these new terms and ideas? By the way, I'll probably fall off the stage at some point. It'll be the best session you've ever been to. It'll be great. So just bear with me on that kind of thing. So what if we just throw these new terms and frameworks into a typical old process, with typical expectations? It'll probably work out, right? Apply rose-colored glasses. Okay. So, hey folks, thanks for coming to this first meeting to talk about how we're going to tackle this project. So we should be regenerative. Let's just do that. How should we start? Yeah.
Well, I have a checklist.
Mm-hmm.
And how many points does it take to get to regeneration?
30.
Really? 30?
No.
Oh.
No. So regeneration is about whole system function, not a list exactly. So.
But you said we could do this, right? I mean, you said this was going to help our process, and we're going to get through. And I mean, I have a budget and a schedule. I have a lot of things I need to do.
Well, I know that you've got to, you've got your responsibilities and the budget and all of that. But I don't know if we just follow the list. I mean, we've got to look at the energy, and we've got to look at the water, and then the site. You just have to consider all those things.
Right. Can you help?
Yeah. So.
No, I mean, is the city going to go for this?
From what I'm hearing, this is not sounding like a process we're familiar with. I would expect a long time for approval.
Well, you guys you're never available anyway. I mean, your hours say that you open at 8. I'm there at 7:55. I've been there at least 10 times in the last 2 weeks. And
when we're talking.
And you're just never available to talk to.
So let's back up a minute.
Project after project.
Yeah. Rose-colored glasses slowly falling off. Okay, so that was tongue-in-cheek and really fast, right? But did any of that sound familiar? All of it? Yeah, okay, great. So what if we approach that a little bit differently? And I think probably the reality is that some folks out there are really just not ready to dive into regeneration, but we actually believe that a lot more people are than you might think. What we believe is that there are regeneration or regenerative development compatible cores or core values underneath these surfacey agendas that tend to rule the day. And so a process in which we can kind of cut through those surface agendas to those core values offers an opportunity to find a common regenerative kind of path. Now that does still require at least some basic alignment, and we find that it generally, a prerequisite is a desire to progress, to not just do just another project, right? So let's try that again slightly differently. So hi folks, as the decision makers on this project, we have each chatted individually at certain points, and you've each mentioned regenerative development or beyond green, or at least
I haven't.
You haven't. Sorry, my team members here.
You just need to get your head into the process.
We got a process.
Yeah. So you've all at least expressed a desire to do something special, to add greater value than the typical project. And in our discussions, there was even the seeds of thinking about a new direction for your company, that this project might reflect that. So I wanted to pull us together before the project started, really in earnest, and talk about how we might actually design the process of the project to move us towards whatever our kind of collective version of that new way is. And I just want to kind of start that conversation with you by saying, how do you think our regenerative development approach, or our seeking a regenerative development approach, might differ from a typical green building process?
Well,
We
I
have
was
an
at this.
approval process.
You,
We have a approval process, so.
Sure, yeah. Round two, buddy, round two.
We're aware of that.
Okay.
So I was at this great session at Greenbuild, and one of the things that they
B04.
talked about
Yeah.
was being of service. And I think as developers, we actually are of great service to our communities.
Sure.
I mean, I think about that. We're adding jobs, we're adding tax base, we're taking dilapidated, places like this, and we're refreshing and revitalizing them. So I think we already are regenerative.
Okay. I mean, I did hear an expression of pushing the envelope even further in terms of the value that you're able to generate. So,
Well, I've always like worked toward uber green projects. So if we have something like a net zero energy project, which I think we could do, given a little bit of financing and those kinds of things, and maybe a project that's really goes a long way in terms of water usage or sharing water usage, or I don't know what that looks like, but what is that? How does that tie into being regenerative? I mean, is that what we're looking for?
yeah, well, I appreciate that question and perspective. I think those things certainly matter, right? So the impacts that those strategies reflect obviously matter. However, what I think we probably need to do to move into kind of a different paradigm where we're seeking truly new potential is to sort of push that subsystem and component level deep dive down the path of our process a little bit, and stay initially in a phase of really trying to understand the whole system within which we're nesting this project. And so those things that you're mentioning, so perhaps we will eventually set a goal of net zero energy on the project, but that's needs to be nested within the considerations of how that relates to the needs of the living systems in this place.
But
Just let me know when you're ready, because that sounds like a long process. You don't need me for a while.
Well, yeah, I think an
We
important...
kind of like your company, though,
Oh,
because you're open now,
Thanks.
right?
Wait a minute. I'm starting to see some opportunity here, though.
Oh.
So I spend a lot of money on lawyers and long processes, and honestly, I can't afford to do that. I'd like to get my project through a little bit more quickly, and I'm starting to see that maybe what he's talking about is that we engage a bigger community in understanding what they need. So do you have any ideas of what this community needs? Like the surrounding demographics? What's going on here?
Well, yeah, come to think of it, our planning office has done some good demographic work, and the area you guys are talking about, in the master plan, our city's hoping that there's some good redevelopment there. So we would support it from that point of view. And if you're talking about earlier engagement of community, it's something that we've done on some projects, and actually it has sped up the process. Where you might think this is longer, developer, I don't want to say you're mistaken, but I do want to come across that, earlier input by community is different than roadblocks from the neighborhood.
Another important factor there is that we're talking about providing a higher level of value, and the reality is the immediate stakeholders of this project, the folks that already live in, around, and pass through this place that we're working on, have an understanding of it that we could not unless we were amongst them, right? So engaging them in that process will open up new opportunities and potential. And so, I think that it would make some sense to actually engage these stakeholders as co-designers before we put pen to page on what the design is.
Wait, co-designer sounds a lot different than just community engagement. I'm hearing something a little different here.
Yeah, it is a little bit different than just community engagement. So there's some common patterns and approaches there, but there's also an investigation into the system these folks rely on and the way that we might affect it beyond just a needs assessment. So you're probably each starting to have a hazy, at least, image of how our kickoff charrette might be a little different, and what it might look like. And there are some specific tools that can help us with this stepping out to the whole system and exploring it, and then from there moving down into interdependencies among the subsystems. So let's take a look at that. And scene. Yes, by all means. Yes.
Okay, so that was pretty amateur, but hopefully we made some good points to you. And as you were commenting or shaking your heads, you've been through that kind of a process. Maybe that second redo of the process is something that you have seen as well or experienced, and if not, we are starting to experience it, and we see good hope in that community engagement process and some of the other things that happen. And for really about the last 8 years, our institute has helped to create this thing called Lenses, and as you can see, it stands for Living Environments in Natural, Social, and Economic Systems. And this is not another checklist. It's not another rating system. It is a process framework that can really guide project teams or communities. And so Josie's going to take us through some of the sort of the backstory and of Lenses. You have one in front of you, and you can see we call it Lenses because there are, as you can see, 3 lenses that you could ideally look through.
And it's convenient for the acronym as well.
Right.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you guys for your great acting jobs. Don't quit your day job, but.
Yeah.
So Lenses has been developed, as Brian was saying, over the last 8 years. We've had over 500 professionals from a variety of disciplines, including design and construction, but also including agriculture, human capital, organizational development, community planning and organizing, even artists and musicians. We've had kids as young as 13 years old and folks probably well into their 70s and 80s who've been part of this. So we've been very cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary in this work. Probably about 15,000 hours of volunteer time have been added to this, and we just recently completed our first pilot facilitator training this last summer. It's been used on dozens of kinds of projects, including a food forest in Austin, Texas, a residential development that I'll talk a little bit more about in Costa Rica, an affordable housing project for coaching and human capital development, and for organizational development and team building. So one of the first and most important things is about developing the capacity as people to see and contribute to whole living systems. This means that we are working on the levers of change related to mindset, values, and goals. We're working on cultivating will and realizing potential. So this is a different order of work than working on other important things, such as reducing our energy use or increasing infiltration of water systems. This is about starting to see what is the emergent potential in a place. What is the community need? What is the community asking for on an ecological perspective, on a human perspective, and on an economic perspective? So lenses is made up of 3 components, or 3 lenses. I'm going to start at the bottom with the vitality lens. So the vitality lens is helping us to define degenerative and regenerative. It goes back to what Max was talking about a little bit, and starting to see that spectrum of what does it mean to maybe slow down the rate of harm or to acknowledge the resources that we are using, but then also to look into the places where we're rebuilding capital, where we're starting to rediscover potential in place. So that's what that lens is about. The second one is the flows lens, and the flows lens really has to do with context. Context is incredibly important, whether we're working on developing our potential as a human being, as an individual, whether we're looking at developing our potential as an organization, or we're developing the potential of our place. It's important to understand context and how this person has evolved over time. Max started to talk about being the product of 2 psychiatrists and what that has meant. So,
psychologist, which is like psychiatrist, but without the medicine.
Fair enough. So knowing that about Max, though, helps us to understand better his essence. And it is about the relationships that have happened in his life that make some of that interesting and start to come to life. So we'll dig into these a little bit more, and actually you guys are going to start working this framework here in just a minute. And then the foundation lens. These are the guiding principles of sustainability. They have been developed through a meta-analysis of what sustainability principles are, and understanding how those principles relate in the context of your particular project. So what does an intergenerational view mean to you, to your organization, to the place or to the project that you're working on, for example? So as Brian said, this is a structured system. The system is made up of 3 parts: pre-work, workshop or workshops, and implementation. In the pre-work, it's about understanding a little bit of context initially, enough that we can start to select participants. In the workshops, you go through a flows analysis to understand the turning points and how flows have changed over time. Then you go to that foundation and understand your guiding principles as they relate particularly to your project. From there, you can start to explore vitality and potential. It is through this place of deeper knowing, through this place of understanding essence, that we're able to identify high leverage opportunities to intervene within the system. Then it becomes a management system. How do we track and manage our goals for those high leverage activities that we've identified? How do we evaluate whether or not they're working? And then finally, what do we need to renew? There's a constant need for adaptation and change. To dive into the workshops a little bit, we suggest a structured 2-day workshop that starts with an introduction of some of the key concepts. Obviously, we did that in a very abbreviated way today, but hopefully you were starting to pick up at least some of the initial ideas and get people to start to experience that spectrum from degeneration to regeneration. From there, we go into the flows analysis, and we start with understanding the turning points. What are the turning points in each of your lives? What are the turning points in your organization? Or what are the turning points for your project or the community in which your project resides? So understanding that greater context. Then We look at key relationships. We may discover that there is a very potent relationship between culture and water in a given place. I live in the arid West. We do have a very strong relationship between what we do and the water that's available to us, as an example. Then we start to learn some things and understand what is it about this place that is unique, that is essential. What are the vital relationships? What are the things that we didn't know? Then we go back to that foundation lens, understand guiding principles, and make commitments. So I think all of us have experienced guiding principles that fall by the wayside when that dynamic and push comes to shove between the developer and the architect and the regenerative consultant and the city planner. Guiding principles sometimes don't live up to their promises. So we felt like it's important to make stronger promises than just identifying guiding principles, but to say, now that we know this, I promise, I commit that I will do, that we will be inclusive of this population that's next to the Kmart, for example. There, we go into big ideas. So what are the potential leverage points? What are the activities that we're doing that can build capacity within the community? So whether that's engaging the students from a local at-risk high school, for example, in some part of the project, whether that is listening to a disadvantaged population and what they might need or what they might be able to benefit from, whether that's building, I'll get into an example, so I'll show you those in a minute. And then you create action plans from there. So it's a matter of then, what are the relationships we need to build? How are we going to track and measure our progress?
Josie, I think it's worth mentioning briefly that while our institute has been doing the integrative design process for years and years, this process that you're talking about actually fits right into an integrative process you're probably familiar with.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to ground this just a little bit in a project example. One of my coworkers on this project is here with us today, so thanks for coming. Bosque is a project in rural Costa Rica. If you're familiar with the geography, it's on the northern peninsula coastal side of Costa Rica. It's a 14-acre mixed development, primarily residential, with some restaurant and vending or retail opportunities there. And we've been using lenses on the master planning process. One of our guiding questions for that project has been, how do we improve the health and vitality of natural, social, and economic systems? Now this is challenging. It's an undeveloped piece of property, second growth forest, so it was cut down at one point, but it is regrown. And when you walk the forest, it's hard to ask yourself the question, how could we as humans better this place? How could we serve a participatory role in the evolution and succession of this forest? How does it become healthier because we are here, not worse off because of our presence, right? So when we think about a dilapidated mall, for example, it's easy to think about how that might be better because of some renewed human presence and some intentionality. But to think of this beautiful piece of land and to question, could human inhabitation actually make this place more healthy and vibrant is both challenging and very interesting. So as outcomes of using lenses on this project, we were able to identify guiding principles for the project. We are in the midst of doing a flows assessment, so we have engaged, in this instance, a number of professionals, although I would argue that you don't have to hire a huge team of consultants in order to do this. But we have done a tree survey, we've done corridor surveys, we've been looking at the hydrology and of fire patterns and the entire watershed, and we've been looking at a lot of sort of components of it. It's important, though, to not get lost in that and understand that just because we're taking certain measurements, that doesn't tell us much. So if you measured my pulse right now, it might be kind of fast, but that doesn't tell you much about the essence of who I am, right? So these investigations are only important to the extent that we start to understand the essence and character of place so that we might help it to realize its potential more fully. Some of the key findings from our flows assessment have to do with transportation. Current transportation is very dangerous. They're basically dirt roads that are very dusty. Women and kids and seniors and everybody walks down these roads. They inhale a lot of dirt as they are walking down the roads. The cars are very dangerous. They're trying to ride their bicycles. And when I was down there, I discovered that the way that people used to get around was through these covered canopy walkways. So they were these sort of in the forest walkways that were cool and comfortable and dust-free, and they were very pleasant ways to get around. So looking at how to revitalize that trail system within this community, not just on our project, but within the community. Another important realization was the value of the valleys versus the ridge lines. So if you've ever done sort of, high-end residential development, you know that ridge lines are often seen as the prime lots, right? It's that place with the great view. Well, in our experiential visits, what we discovered is that those high places are actually really uncomfortable, and they're not always what they're cut out to be. And the places where we felt most safe and most comfortable and cool were in the valleys under the tree canopy. So we understood that a little bit. And then we also learned about the importance of fire. And you don't think of that in this highly wet, climate of Costa Rica, but actually fires are a big part of the ecosystem, and they're an important thing to be aware of when you're considering building materials and placement of building materials. So those are some of the things that we came to understand. And from there, you start to develop big ideas. The big idea that I'm going to talk about is actually off-site, but it's the development of a wood shop. And this wood shop, could say what I was saying when I was the developer, that, it's providing jobs for people who need them. That's a great thing. How can we make that better? How can we make that something meaningful? Well, like so many rural areas, this area is struggling with education for its youth who are not college-bound. So the college-bound ones grow up and move on and leave, and the folks who are left don't necessarily have great opportunities. How could this wood shop start to cultivate the abilities and the capacity within the community for people who prefer to work with their hands rather than their minds? Or who may have great capability to work with their minds and their hands? How do we start to cultivate them into business owners and into managers and start to fill some of those gaps within the community from there? How do we start to source our wood in a way that is promoting forest health and not deforestation? So that's one leverage point, but we can start to make multiple entry points that go beyond giving people basic jobs, which in fact is much needed, but how can it be developmental at its core? So with that, we're going to turn the floor over to you all and we believe that the best way to understand this work is actually to try to do it. So we're going to ask you to do a little bit of flows analysis. And in that, first, you're going to do some self-reflection. So we want you to identify key turning points in either in your life, or in your organization, or in the community in which your project is located. So you have 3 scales that you can work on. We wanted this to be applicable to anyone and everyone. So even if you are a student and you don't have a project to work on or an organization that you're working in, you definitely have yourself that you can be working on, right? So choose one of those, yourself, your organization, or the community in which one of your projects exists. And think about the turning points. So you might even want to jot them down if you have a piece of paper, but think about what are some of the turning points that you know of. Turning points are big shifts. You go through life, and most days is just another day, and some days or some years are really big deals. Something happens, whether that's,
A skid at Greenbuild.
A skid at Greenbuild maybe changes your life. Let's hope so. But so think about that, and then once you've identified, 3 to 5 turning points, then consider a couple of the flows. And this is where having the lenses wheels around you may be able, you may not be able to read all of those, although it looks like it might translate pretty well to the back. But pick a couple of those and think about how they've changed over those eras. So over those turning points, how have they changed? Then what we're going to have you do is reflect on the question, what is it that makes you or this place tick? What is its essence? So there's kind of a big assignment. We're going to give you a few minutes to think quietly on your own, and then we want you to do a little bit of table talk. So we want you to self-organize into groups of 5 or 6. So this means like some of you people in the front may actually turn around and talk to some of the people in the back, or create little groups, however you do. It might be a little bit easier back there where you don't have the tables in the way. And your instructions for your report out are that each person speaks in order, only listening to the person who is speaking. So it's not a dialogue initially, but each person shares their reflections. And then if you have a few minutes left, you can open it up into open dialogue. So I know that's a lot of instructions, but they're all up on the list. And I think Brian's going to add something about the timing.
Yeah, just that we'll go 5 minutes for that self-reflection, and then we'll do 10 minutes for that table talk, and then we'll do a 10-minute report out. So 5 minutes, reflect on your own. We'll let you know when that's close to being up, and then we'll make sure you get into small groups. Now, if you would get in small groups of 3 to 6, so as Josie said, we could ask the first 3 of you to turn around and work with that group. So let's kind of see how that works, groups of 3 to 6.
Okay, folks, let's chat. So 10 seconds to kind of wrap up your chatting, and then we're gonna put you on the spot.
Just Max needs to be on number 4.
And we're done. So first of all, I'm curious. Did anybody notice there's a blank? Yeah. Did anybody put something there? Anybody up for offering what that was? We're gonna run a mic to you. So okay, one sec. Brian, get the mic. Right up here, second from the end. So what did you place there?
My organization has people power as its resource, its major resource. We're like an overhead organization. I work at U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm Kathy Broad. And so people.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else fill the blank in? What was that? So yeah, that blank, we heard a report that someone looked at it and said, oh, it's so close to being complete. But actually that's very deliberate. Okay, so is anyone else brave enough to share a little bit of what came up for them at the personal scale? Did anybody do themselves rather than a project or a company? Anybody who's up for sharing? Just grab a hand, Brian.
I had a really big one that about 10 years ago I was diagnosed as bipolar disorder. And that affected almost everything, almost all the flows. Energy, well-being, education, how I use my time, how effective I am in my relationships, in my workplace. It was a huge turning point.
So that awareness really changed the way it worked.
Yes, I went from a completely degenerative to a completely regenerative space.
Wow, awesome. Shocker, the guy raised by 2 psychologists takes it right into therapy. Anybody else have a personal one that they want to share? A turning point or observation that felt pretty salient? Over here in the middle. Just throw it.
Hi, I'm Morgan. I actually graduate from college in 3 weeks. So
Nice.
This is that big transition stage for me. So I took it to a personal level, that this is where I'm learning to become more self-reliant, that every decision from here on out is mine and mine alone. So I should think of myself while still thinking of other human beings.
Yep.
And just keeping my general well-being ahead of the rest. That I'm naturally a workaholic. I know it. So just
You
making
looking for a
sure.
job or?
But just making sure that every decision from here on out is what's best for me. Knowing the right time to say no to certain things, taking on as many tasks as I can without overloading myself at the same time. So this is, I haven't reached the key turning point yet, but I know it's approaching, and so I'm ready.
Nice. Good luck with it. Awesome. So I don't necessarily invite the hearing other people's stuff on the personal stuff, because who knows what we're going to find out that they don't want you to share. But so let's talk a little bit. I suspect a lot of you used companies or the context that your projects are in, and so we like to state this in such a way that, in particular, your 6-person report outs. Did anybody hear anything that was really salient or particularly interesting, whether it's at the project context or company level, that they'd be up for sharing? Really? You're lying. Yeah, right here. Nice.
Hello. So I guess one of the main things we realized is that there was an underlying frustration before the turning point, and a certain lack of power or exasperation or unhappiness or need for a change.
Was this in a company or a project?
This is actually overall, whether it was personal, a project, or a company.
Oh, this was just a general dynamic.
General
that you found in
dynamic
all.
of our group here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you, go.
I don't think I'm live.
I don't think you're live either. What were you gonna say?
Maybe I'm live. No, not yet.
Just tell me. I'll tell them.
Okay. So I
There
was
we
just
go.
going to comment that is excellent pattern recognition,
Right.
which is one of the key skill sets that's necessary in doing regenerative work. So you guys get a gold star.
I was gonna say that. No, that is interesting. I'm gonna butcher the quote and forget the source, but there's a great principle, and if any of you know the source, blurt it out. But tension and conflict is just change trying to happen. So I think that is a probably nearly universal dynamic. Any examples of that turning point from projects or companies? Yeah, go right back from those. He wants the mic back.
In our case, it was a lack of power. We felt, as architects, as general contractors in the business, in the green business for the past 15 years, not having enough impact in our community, not having enough impact for the benefit of the environment. So we became developers, and now we're dealing. So now we're dealing with becoming this paradigm shift. Now, whereas before we had developers as clients, now
Right.
we're our own clients, and especially the money, if you want, issue, which is totally different game when you're a developer.
So basically, in a way, you couldn't find the clients you wanted, so you turned into them.
I turned myself into
Yeah.
my own client. Yes, our business did that.
I've pulled that one myself. That's a good move, actually, if you can pull it off. Yeah, over here. Stacy, we got. Oh, sorry, you're next. Right up here up front.
I work with NASA in the presidential order. I don't remember the number to make energy all government buildings zero energy and zero water and waste by 2020 is a game changer, and I would
Yep.
say that would be a turning point.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
I just wanted to go back to your point about tension and conflict being change wanting to occur. And it just made me think, if you've ever read any introductory book on project management, you'll read something about the stages of project delivery and project team development,
Yep.
which are typically along the lines of you form the team, and then norming, as in you get used to working together, storming, where you've been working together now and you're all frustrated with each other. And then once you get that past that, there's performing, which is where you've kind of been through the normative stages, you've been through the frustrating stages, and now you're actually a well-oiled machine that's working together. And I think that's a perfect example of what you were just talking about. I just wanted to bring it up because it made me think of that.
So I'm curious, I want to ask you, do you see all the ormings changing a little bit in this process compared to a typical project management approach? In other words, storming's like the second to last thing, and that's where all the tension and change is.
Right. To be quite honest, I want to know more about your process.
Yeah, sure.
I'm not very familiar with it,
Right.
so I can't give you an educated answer on that.
So
maybe you want to speak about it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to that. So, I'd love for my teammates here to chime in also, but my stance and interpretation of trying to hold the ormings up next to integrative and regenerative process is that kind of accepting the way that plays out as necessary is maybe not the way to go, and that actually we can pull, there's a version of storming that happens certainly, but what we try to do is we try to pull the shared visioning and team building and kind of working through co-creating an outlook back to the very beginning, so that performing is a much bigger span of time in that overall process and easier and more effective. Do you guys have other thoughts about that?
Well, no, but I was going to shift gears a little bit.
Sounds good. Let's do it. Guys, thanks so much for doing that. That was great.
So I know that was a fast activity. What I want you to take away from that particular activity is the importance of understanding context. Too often we go in and we jump into a project or we jump into a team and assume that we know all that there is to know about that place, the people that we're working with, what our organizational purpose or function is, what the potential is, and we can't understand potential until we understand context. So that's sort of the big takeaway, is the importance of understanding context and then thinking about that in terms of turning points, how flows have changed over time, and then starting to discover essence. And that question of essence is so important. What is it that makes you tick? What is it that makes your organization tick? What is it that makes the community that you're working in tick? And what are those tensions? What is that opportunity that is emergent, that is about to come forward? Whether you're graduating from college and you're going to, emerge into the world as a professional and as an adult, find where those places are, because hidden in that is what is the potential for growth and ultimately for regeneration. So that's sort of your key takeaway from this one. The next thing that we're going to do is to move into a foundation lens activity. Again, we're just trying to give you a taste of this. And in the foundation lens, again, you'll do a little bit of self-reflection, so probably on the same topic that you started with, and pick 2 or 3 principles and see how they relate to yourself, your project, or your organization. So think about, intergenerational view, interdependence, respecting limits, justice, partnership, health, spirit, stewardship, or perhaps come up with one of your own. And then notice that the nested bottom line is also present on this lens. So looking at natural systems as being that which encompasses all life. Social systems are integrated within natural systems, and then economics are a subset of human systems. So this is how these systems actually exist in the world. They are not equally weighted and they're not equally sized, although I think that sometimes we perceive them differently than that. So at any rate, take a minute with this lens as you see it. Think back to your project or yourself or your organization and pick 2 or 3 of these and start to explore what they mean in relationship to the context of whatever it is that you're thinking about. So take 3 to 5 minutes for that. Then we'll do a second round where you report out in the same fashion that you just did. We'll do a similar round where you all report out back to us, and then we're going to move on. So have at it. So if you've done that, take it to the next level. You're doing still self-reflection. And think about a couple of commitments that you could make. So promises to yourself, or promises to or for your organization, or to or for your project. So take another minute to think about, as an extension of what these guiding principles mean, and as an extension of the context or perspective that you've gained, ask what it is that you could commit to doing related to one or more of these guiding principles. And then you've got about another minute or a minute and a half for that, and then you'll turn around and discuss, as you did last time, with the 1 minute per person report out, and then you can open it up into conversation. Just make sure that everybody has a chance to share their thoughts and their discoveries.
So let's go kind of back around the track here a little bit like we did last time. Again, this time we actually pointed out the blank. But I'm curious, again, did anybody have an interesting addition for the blank for the foundations lens?
I added awareness.
Awareness.
Knowing what's going on with yourself and what's going on with other people, so that you can be able to work within the other frameworks and foundations.
Yeah, that's interesting. We just went through a clear kind of retreat last week, and one of the candidates that we were throwing around, we of course wanted to like double the number of things on the lens, and we tried not to, but one of them that was similar to that was consciousness, that we were just trying to, very, very similar idea there behind it. Over here, yeah?
One thing I got was like, say, history or reflection. To
Oh, that's
kind of
good.
go
Yep.
back to stuff and reflect with it.
History and reflection, I like that. Anyone else have an interesting thought on the blank? Over here we got one. Stacy.
Thank you. So first off, maybe just a little background for our discussions that happened. I'm a student senator at my campus. I'm a master's student at the University of Wyoming. And bringing up the blank, the whole time while we've been talking about this, like in what I do with Senate, like I'm an architectural engineering student, so I bring a different perspective to like a political matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think like all of this, there's so much more out there. Like that's the point of the blank. It's to
Right.
not list and limit ourselves while, real quick, the two words that I brought up for my foundation thing was spirit and respecting limits. And I believe people have to really be into and want to use what you give them. They want to create more of what you give them in order for them to have the spirit to actually move forward with something. And then on top of that, like respecting limits, we have to be able to recognize like problems. We have to be able to, in a way, make a list of everything that we need to take care of, but at the same time, we have to realize like this isn't the be-all, end-all of it. And at the same time, almost just move completely away from that. We have to just recognize like what else is out there, like what else can other people bring to us, where are their foundations, because chances are there are many foundations that aren't on the list.
Right. So as we've discussed, this is a process of sourcing from place. The other thing, just a friendly kind of addition to what you're saying about the problems, and is to some extent I think what you're getting at with seeking other foundations, is there's often a very different dynamic between looking for things to fix versus seeking new potential. And so that's just kind of a little yellow flag to carry around for yourself of there's probably only so far you're going to be able to push your project in terms of value, fixing problems or filling gaps or whatever. Okay, so in terms of, I'm a little high, I think. Not,
Wow, Max.
not in the good way. Yeah. So, can we bring me down a little? Thanks. Sorry. Seems like it's blasting. And I'm really hungry. No. So again, I want to invite any folks that were working on themselves at the personal scale. Did anybody have an interesting realization or conclusion around what commitments you started to envision related to any of these foundations? Come on, be brave.
Just open it up, projects too.
Yeah, fine. We'll just open it up. Over here, Lance.
First, okay, and then up front.
So, Lance Davis with GSA, and one of the things I was looking at partnerships, and one of the things we do is when we hire architects and engineers, we bring in outside peers to review the work. And it's been a great way to really make sure that the quality of the work we get is at very high level, because obviously if someone else is of the same caliber is reviewing your work, you're going to put your best foot forward. And the commitment that I made that I think is appropriate here is in that list of peers, we have lots of great architects and engineers, a lot of which are heavily involved in sustainability, but none that I'm aware of that are involved in regenerative design. And so I think that's an aspect we can start to bring to that peer process so that when we look at federal projects, that's being included in.
Great, thanks. Oh, there's someone
Okay, we
up here is waiting.
promise getting the white one, and then we'll come over here.
Yep.
So I'm an architect from San Francisco, Studios Architecture. My name is Justin Glover. And I just what I was telling them was and don't take this the wrong way, but I kind of started to understand this little dial in a little more fundamental level through this exercise compared to the last one. And how I understood it was, these are foundations. And when I started to choose these groups, of which I chose intergenerational view and partnership as my two views, and those relating to two key turning points in my life, which were, the point in which I really realized that the environmental problem is the most foundational problem that exists. And then secondly, that in order to address that problem, you absolutely have to garner a coalition of people around you to get anything done ever. And so, what I figured out was this, like, an intergenerational view, thinking about everything that came before you and after you, is really what formed the foundation for understanding that the environmental problem is the most fundamental problem. So just understanding that this group kind of did define those turning points, I guess, was a big realization for me and what this process is about. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And last one over here. Yeah.
I too chose one of the foundations I chose was partnership. And I shared with the group, I'm a builder, and when I started in my career, it wasn't okay for me to know I was right. I had to make you know I was right too. And luckily, I made a commitment long ago to partnership and to listening more and to finding a solution that met everyone's needs.
That's cool. Thank you for making that commitment. That's great. All right. Thanks, folks, again, for going through that with us.
Yeah. So you can rest a little easy. The participatory part of this, this session is over. Yes, you're off the hook now. We're going to talk about the last sort of core step of this process, but we don't actually have the time to go through it with you. And we are just giving you a taste, right? We're compressing some pretty big ideas into a rather short period of time. But basically what happens after you have started to understand the context, you start to understand potential, created guiding principles and commitments, then you start to look for opportunities for intervention. So you're looking for places that you can add vitality, like that wood shop in Costa Rica, Or like that simple example of how you might be able to start engaging students from one of the local high schools into something that you're doing. They're fundamentally capacity building activities, but you can think, where is it in what we're doing that we can add greater value, that we can build potential, build capacity in natural and living systems and within our social systems. So I'm going to ask Max to give a little bit of a story, since I know I can pick on him and get a quick answer, or, well, a quick-ish answer.
Not quick.
So can you talk about an example of creating vitality and leverage points in one of the projects you're working on?
I think so. Let me give it a shot. So there's a project that a bunch of us have been working on. It's a thus far pro bono project for a man with cerebral palsy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he reached out to me through a mutual acquaintance. His mother had this piece of land. And, you know, so his name's Ron Rambo, and, you know, the form of CP that he has is such that he was essentially an able-bodied toddler and has grown up into a near quadriplegic adult. And rather than sort of complaining about his lot in life, he's very focused on his legacy, which I find really interesting. How many of us, the able-bodied folks, are strolling around and never really focusing on our legacy? So that alone, I think, is pretty powerful. But so Ron's mother had this piece of land and said to him, hey, it's too bad you can't find an architect to design you a house for that piece of land, or you could have it. And that's all Ron needed to hear. And he came to me through a mutual acquaintance, and fast forward a couple years later, we've had about 27 different pro bono designers involved in the process that have contributed, I estimate, about $170,000 in effort. And Ron's mantra throughout the process, every time we would check in with him on, like, do you want to push the envelope in this way, Ron? Is this what you want to do? His mantra is, I want to be a pioneer. So he kept pushing us harder and farther on the performance of this project. And I tried to facilitate the integrative process as I understood it on this project, which was really tricky with pro bono contributors that were sort of in and out. But we did that, and what we didn't really do until sort of midway through the process, which I kind of regret, but was still very powerful ultimately, was think outside of the site box. Right, to think outside of the boundary. And as we started doing that, we held these community meetings, and a couple of things happened in these community meetings. Number one, the driveway that Ron's mother wanted to keep, because the site is right behind her backyard, and it's how she parks and gets in and out of her house. She wanted to keep that. So in my mind, it was like, you know, I'm a green nerd, so it was like, oh, asphalt sucks, but let's make it work because Joyce wants her driveway. In this community meeting, what we found out was there were at least two other wheelchair-bound neighbors that were using this driveway to get in and out of the backs of their houses, which were the only places they could put the ramps. It was a fairly low-income neighborhood because the steps were too steep in the front of those houses. So we didn't realize that this thing was actually already sort of a keystone resource for this neighborhood in a really special and important way. So that was a new level of relationship, and in that newer level of relationship, you know, in pushing the technical green building stuff that I was familiar with, we had arrived at a building that's projected to produce about twice as much energy as it uses, and through relationships with the state of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, and the city is super supportive. The mayor is all about it. He wants it to happen. Through those relationships, we're being allowed to do what are typically illegal things with water. So this site will sit there functioning kind of like a forest. We'll not need a connection to sewers or municipal water. We'll have them as backup, but we won't use them when the system's functioning. Anyway, the one sort of technical problem that we were left with, having designed this system in our kind of silo, was that there would be some nitrates left over in the water coming out of our constructed treatment wetland. And the idea was to engage in an ecological succession process on the site that could grow food that uptakes the nitrates. And out of the community meeting came a bunch of these neighbors that also had adjacent yards that said, can you do that in our yard too? So our site kind of expanded, and they got really excited. And then the city said, can you guys also invest in the alley that splits the site with the driveway and all these backyards, which often floods, so these people are pushing their wheelchairs through a flooded grassy alley. So we said, sure, like absolutely, like this is all one system, let's work on all of it. But the really interesting thing that came out of that, I think the higher vitality that came out of exploring this, was there was this idea about allowing the whole neighborhood to access at least portions of the site whenever they liked to essentially forage. So we were inviting our neighbors to come onto the site, probably during daylight hours or something, but what had been a problem of removing nitrates became an asset to the neighborhood to produce a significant amount of food and nutrition for these neighbors. So I thought that was this really, for me, it was a huge aha. It probably should have been a yeah, duh, but it was an aha that by, I forget, another uncited quote, but I forget what president it was that said, if you can't solve a problem, make it bigger. So at the point that we realized that, wait, if we kind of just draw our scope of consideration a bit more broadly, a problem becomes a huge asset.
And it would look to me like you were addressing issues related to transport, land use, ecosystems, water, well-being, money.
Yep.
Culture maybe, or education a little bit.
Yep.
So that's where, so it's not about going around each one of those flows and trying to improve them individually. It's about looking for those systemic solutions that create benefit across multiple flows. So Brian, you want to round us out?
I'll wrap us up. So what we've been and what you've been experiencing this afternoon is a structured framework to take many different thoughts, but still this aspirational goal or vision about working toward regeneration. It requires a mindset shift. As Max said, a number of people have said, doing less bad is not good enough, and yet doing less bad is important. And yet, how can we jump into that regenerative realm of doing good and thinking more about abundance? So it's that kind of mindset shift that's required, and we invite you to bring that to your work, bring that to your life, and to your career, and to your organization, and to your projects. We have created this guiding framework and with a structured process. At a university, we've created a nonprofit, and we want others to use it. So it's an open-sourced framework for you to use. So that's why we gave it to you today, and we gave you an introduction of how it can be used. It's been used on all different types of projects in sort of a pilot way, from the organizational level to a small kitchen remodel, to a large new development in Australia, a food forest in Austin, the project in Costa Rica. So there's buildings, there are built environments, there are natural environments, and there are people and organizations that are benefiting from this. We want you to use it. We have created a facilitator training process because we want people to know how to use it and then use it well. And so through that process, in fact, Max and Stacy are two of the first pilot facilitators of the Lenses process and are applying it. Max told you about the project that he's applying it to, and Stacy's doing it with an affordable housing project in South Dakota. What you see up there is we're inviting you to text again. We want to see kind of now that you've been thinking about this for an hour and a half, do you have some new words? Do you have some other thoughts? So let's see how this idea goes and how it grows and how those words will come out. So you can see now type in regen2 space and your answer.
And this might have validated the words you used before, so you don't have to change your words, right?
They were pretty good words.
They were pretty good.
What was that one word that?
It put two words together in a strange way. Something.
Roll call or something. Okay. Everyone feels that inclusion is. Okay, now let's. Uh-oh. Talk to us if you're confused.
Someone take that person's evaluation sheet away.
There is so much more that you can learn from about this process, and we're going to invite you to learn. You may have noticed on the back of the set of lenses that we've given you is a website for that nonprofit called Clear. And so we invite you to go to that website. You're going to see other projects and examples of projects that are regenerative. And we're going to continue to add to that so that there are good, what we're calling clear stories about regeneration and regenerative development.
Seems like the big takeaway was leverage.
Yeah. So we have used that word a number of times. Where's vitality?
Yeah, that's all wrong. We've completely failed.
Yeah.
We are going to finish up and give you some time for Q&A. So hopefully, whomever is still feeling confused, we can help provide a little clarity.
All right. So, and I wanted to say, if you are interested in learning more about lenses, here's a few different sources for you. An inspiring book, as you can imagine by its title, is that just came out this year. It's called Designing for Hope. The two authors, one from University of Melbourne, Australia, the other from University of Pretoria in South Africa. In fact, Krishna Duplessis was a keynote speaker at the first Greenbuild in Austin, and she said at that time, sustainability isn't enough. We need to start thinking about regeneration. Now she has co-authored a book related to that with Dominique Hess from University of Melbourne. They talk about lenses as one of those guiding frameworks that can help you in your quest, but it's an inspiring book. A book that's just out called The Heart of Sustainability from Andres Edwards. Andres often participates in Greenbuild. And then a more thorough background discussion and article about lenses is within the regenerative issue of building research and innovation that came out a couple years ago. There are a few other sources, including the website that I gave you, but by all means, take us up on looking up those sources, and you will be inspired not just by lenses, but by many other things that are talked about in those books. And so, how could you become a regenerator if you're really interested in this topic? You can dig into yourself, as we've invited you to do today. You can regenerate your projects. We want you to come to the point where you feel like you could offer and facilitate workshops and project sessions that are about regeneration, that help groups set those high aspirational goals. We would be glad to help you with a first workshop so we could really help you see how to do that, or train you as a lenses facilitator. And you can see, you can look at clearabundance.org and become a lenses facilitator in the spring of 2016, or start a learning community related to that. And another one of our pilot facilitators, I believe, is in the audience.
Yeah, he's here.
Jim, raise your hand. And Jim, we quoted you. There's a nice quote by
you
Jim.
said that, right?
Thank you for that. So Jim is in the Northeast, in the Boston area, and has been applying lenses to some very large-scale projects in the Northeast, and is one of the regenerates, we'll call him. At this point, I want to see if anybody has a question or comment, and if so, Helene, could you help us by moving the microphone around the room, or someone else could pick up that other microphone?
Just go to the last slide.
So let me see if anyone does have a comment or a question as we close out.
Got one over here.
Hi, so I'm the guy who wrote Confused. Sorry about that.
Ah,
But I think it's a good
Chris.
thing. I think that, one of the things I've learned, and this kind of reinforced it as we sat there and did a lot of introspection, is that if you think you know the answer, you're probably wrong. That there's actually, you need to think about it some more. And confusion, especially at the beginning of something, is a good thing.
So that wasn't a negative term in that.
Yeah, I like that. That's excellent, Chris, because that is something that sometimes we call that the groan zone of the integrative design process, where people want to find an answer they think they know, but instead we need to groan about it. And Marcus, you may have been one that helped us learn that terminology. Any other comments or questions? Yes, there's a hand here.
Hi, Max. So I was wondering if you could provide like a website. I don't know if you have the project you were speaking about was published anywhere, if there was more documentation we could look into it and research it more and sort of see if we could apply those same principles to our designs.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. So in reference to the house that I mentioned?
Yes.
Yeah, so actually there's a Facebook page and a website. So if you go on Facebook and I think search for Team Rambo, and we just luckily have the coolest name for this guy's last. His name's Ron Rambo. So Team Rambo is this Facebook page, and then Ron and his aide have put up a site called Ramboland, I think .com, might be .org, and they've been posting a bunch of our progress and stuff on that. But also feel free to reach out to me and we can dig into it, and thank you so much for prompting that. We will be launching a crowdfunding campaign for the project very soon, and we're wrapping up the video for that. So, shameless plug, but it's a pro bono project. So,
right.
But feel free to reach out to me with any other questions about how we set up the project.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question, if there is a comment or question in the back. We're going to wait because this is being recorded, so we want to make sure we catch it for posterity.
So we heard permaculture get name-checked a couple times this morning.
Yeah.
It's a favorite subject of mine. How does lenses relate to permaculture?
Who wants to take it? Josie?
Well, so actually I've grappled with that question a fair bit, and it's probably a conversation worth having over a glass of wine or something. But I would say that the framework that we use to understand that, and all of this is embedded in this sort of regenerative development practice, which is kind of a whole school of thought. But at any rate, permaculture is fundamentally operating at a very high level. It may or may not be regenerative. So regeneration or regenerative development is a process of discovering and realizing potential. So the transformation from, say, a vacant lot to a permaculture garden, if it's done in the context of the community and people's capacity and mindsets are elevated through that, then that becomes regenerative. But permaculture is a I want to say this just right. So permaculture is a practice that encourages us to think in whole systems and to connect the nutrient dots and the succession very thoughtfully and very well done. So it's about operating and existing at a very high order, but regenerative development is about the capacity that we build within the community and within the greater system. So it fits as a kind of technology, if you will, or a very evolved technology that can be implemented through regenerative practice. I'm not sure if that quite gets at it or not, but
it's certainly of the right order, and I would say that there's a good deal of information and thought about in that book, Designing for Hope, about the concepts of permaculture and the integration of permaculture as a strategy toward regeneration. So that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for your time. 2 hours is a long time for you to focus on one thing at a conference when we have so many things going on. But I want to thank our regenerate hero and our devious developer and our adamant architect. So Stacy, Josie, and Max, and the crusty old planner. So thank you.